For today's book, we are going to be revisiting Crucial Conversations by Joseph Grenny and co-authors Kerry Patterson, Ron McMillan, and Al Switzler. When I first heard the phrase Crucial Conversations, great title, by the way, wonderful title, very intriguing. I thought it meant very high stakes arguments, intense, dramatic, or like crossroad type arguments, turning points in your life, things like that, the crucial conversations. And it is true. Those are some of the crucial conversations he talks about. But also, a crucial conversation is any conversation where opinions differ, any conversation where emotions run high or where the stakes are significant. And obviously, the crazy thing is that's the majority of life. In the NFL, that's the majority of conversations in a marriage, in a workplace, with your kids, I'm sure, as they get older. So yeah, in this episode, Steve and I are going to revisit the clips from the original interview and break down about 4 or 5 of those clips, from running a business to being on a football field. Like I said, we're just gonna negotiate, or we're gonna navigate this idea of crucial conversations as a paradigm shifting skill. So let's go into this first clip of Joseph Grenny.
It turns out that the health of relationships, the health of teams, even the health of entire organizations can be largely predicted by one simple thing. And that is the average lag time between when people see something and when they say something, between when they feel a concern and when they discuss their concern. That lag time drives the quality of marriages, the intellectual honesty of executive teams, even the strength and health of entire organizations. So that's how we began to focus on crucial conversations as a critical variable in organizational performance.
So short clip, but really powerful. I mean, that statistic around the lag time kind of floored me when I first heard that. I'd always assumed communication was about clarity or even the charisma of the person. But it turns out that timing is everything. And the backstory of how they came to this statistic too, I think is important because they were in hundreds or thousands of organizations and basically measured this as I don't think they initially set out to write this book around crucial conversations, but it was more a discovery of working with teams and all these organizations and being like, wow, actually the major issue is lag time between seeing something and actually saying something. And again, I think anyone can, when you really think about life and work and you kind of reflect on that, I'm thinking like in terms of a business setting, long delays, especially when there's topics you need to discuss with someone, can create really toxic patterns. Everyone can relate to people venting behind closed doors, resentment grows, politics spread. So the whole idea of saying it sooner, that the best performing teams, organizations, families are those that lessen that lag time between seeing it and actually saying. I just thought it was a very interesting kind of conclusion that they came to, in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. And what's funny is I think a term that gets thrown around a lot, at least in a relationship, is this idea of being non-confrontational. And I'm definitely a non-confrontational person. And it's something that I've had to work on. And it's, I don't know why, but it's just hard to talk about things. But like you said, emotions fester. But not only that is, especially in a business setting, you lower the bar for what is acceptable. There's a great quote. I know our grandfather mentions it a lot. Is you teach people how to treat you by what you will allow. And I think about some of the best coaches I've ever played with. Something they have in common is they're not fooled by the outcome of a play if the way that outcome came to be was not perfect or was not done correctly. I have played for coaches where it's the opposite, where it's, the outcome, great play, but we definitely didn't do it correctly, and they won't say anything. It's like, oh, we kind of got away with it that time, right? But the best coaches I've ever played for, they're not fooled by that outcome. if we didn't do the correct technique, they said, no, I don't care about the outcome. We got to fix this because down the road in a more high stakes situation, if we don't fix this and address this now, we're going to be, in bad trouble. So just this idea of lag time and, well, the problem is small, bringing it up and making a habit of that.
Have you had, Britt, like, an NFL college career with coaches? Have your coaches like addressed, like the good coaches like festering things? I mean, I think about like the NFL and even, the last few years you've been in Philly where there's a lot of drama and I feel like the media tries to make drama happen. It seems like Coach Sirianni was a good example of someone like that would address things head on and not let things fester. Again, that's just me from the outside, but yeah, just curious if that's something you saw.
Oh, no, absolutely. And it's what I just said is we would go over the smallest little details every day after practice that 90% of coaches and players would kind of just skip past. And he would address them almost to a point where we're like, okay, we get it. We've been taught this a million times, right? But it's much better than the alternative of, just seeing how long you can get away with it and if it will correct itself, So it's definitely a skill you can learn.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Anyway, so maybe we'll just leave kind of this point with, for people listening. Here's a question that we kind of thought of that you can ask yourself, and this goes for obviously me and Britt as well. But think about a concern that you might be holding on to right now, whether it's big or small. What's your personal lag time between seeing it and saying it? Do something about it. And what would happen if you shortened that by even one day? So just a question to think about. But with that, let's jump into the next clip with Joseph around starting with your heart.
The book is organized into 3 different temporal components of a crucial conversation. What do you do before you open your mouth? How do you open your mouth? And then how do you finish? And so if those are three broad chunks of a crucial conversation, in fact, I'm working on a 3rd edition of the book right now, and it'll be much more clearly broken out into those elements. So they're on my mind. Honestly, you refer to the Pareto principle, 80% of what it takes to ensure it goes well is doing the stuff before you open your mouth. If you just get your heart right, your head right, your emotions right, the words tend to naturally follow. And effective crucial conversations aren't about some kind of esoteric diplomatic skills. It's not cobbling together the right combination of words to get past somebody's defenses. It really is about where you're coming from. And so the principles of start with heart, of master my stories, and then as you begin the conversation, creating some safety for others, those really are the foundation. And if people do those right, even one of those 3, the odds go up enormously that people will be able to hear what you need to say in a way that doesn't provoke defensiveness. Now, I have to caution, this isn't a magic trick book. This isn't about that you can get what you want from people and manipulate them into responding the way you're hoping. All we're offering in this is if you hold the conversation well, then hopefully they'll be able to hear what you have to say in a way that doesn't provoke defensiveness. The strength of your argument is going to have to stand on its own after that. But at the end of the day, we should all be wanting truth, not just getting our way. And so if you make your argument and there's more truth to be had from the other side that helps you better achieve your goals, then hallelujah.
Man, I love that. I love that he addresses head on, that this is a skill and something you learn, but it's not manipulation, right? It's about wanting to be heard and understood. And that's, any argument that or conversation, that's the point of it for you is you want to be understood, feel understood. Everybody wants to feel understood and work towards the truth, not winning, but whatever the truth is. I think that something, we mentioned a little bit earlier, but part of the reason why you don't bring up things is fear of offending people, right? Whether it's fear of offending or just fear of confrontation, feeling uncomfortable bringing something up. But this is a really important idea of to not provoke defensiveness, starting with your heart before you ever open your mouth. you are less likely to provoke defensiveness. He said 80% of successful crucial conversations happen before you even speak with your heart. Where's your heart at? So I just think it's a really good point to go over.
Yeah, it reminded me of a real life example that I had a few years back when I was working for a company that we would sell to municipalities and cities for big infrastructure projects. And we had a key component as part of these projects. It was a physical product. And one time we were working with a big city on the East Coast, and we had fumbled and made a lot of mistakes on the manufacturing side, and it was literally holding up, an entire city.
I remember that.
Yeah, I won't get into all the specific details because it doesn't fully matter. But what the point of this was, we had a really high stakes meeting with the city, and also some consultants that were part of the project. And my CEO flew in for this meeting, and I'll never forget just being terrified, like going into this meeting and being so like afraid. And then before we walked into the meeting with the city, the CEO just kind of paused and talked to me. Said, "Hey, let's remember our motive and our intent as we go into this conversation. We're going in and we're acknowledging the mistakes that we've made as a company, that we care about the city being successful, and we're going to highlight moving forward." I reflected on that experience, and that's exactly what Joseph Grenny was talking about, is that 80% of a successful conversation is about getting your heart, your head, and your emotions right. And so it was a great live example of me seeing someone do it in practice, where right before we entered, he just kind of sat back, and I don't know if he was if he had gone through Crucial Conversations or read the book, but or it was just intuitive to him. But that was really impactful, where 80% of the success of that conversation was basically how he approached it from his head and heart and mindset. The conversation was incredible. It was so productive. There was very little defensiveness when there absolutely could have been. And I 100% credit the CEO of that company, Vince. If you're listening, shout out to you. That was an incredible, experience as a real life.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love Vince. Shout out to Vince. Yeah. So next time you're, needing to have a hard conversation, just ask yourself, what is my motive? Am I here to just have my point be the, trump all card, or am I here truly for truth? And read this book, because he goes into some great little skills you can have, but he clarifies once again that the vast majority of it is start with your heart. Let's jump into our next clip where he talks about mastering your story.
Stephen, I'll go to my grave working on this one.
Yeah.
It's this one I think is the skill of emotional control. And emotional maturity is the key to life. Our capacity to understand and intervene to affect our own emotions, to regulate our own emotions, is really the master skill of life. It helps us achieve great relationships that we can sustain, be a great leader. And so the key insight here is that all of your emotions are yours, and you create them through the stories you tell. We describe three kinds of stories: victim, villain, and helpless stories, that are at the root of most of the unproductive emotions that get in the way of us having effective, crucial conversations. And so to the degree people can be conscious of when they're authoring those kinds of stories and then intervene to interrogate and challenge those stories, they can develop a tremendous amount of emotional intelligence.
So what Joseph talks about here is so impactful. I'm going to tie it back to just in a sales role, because that's what I've known for most of my career. So this idea of what story are you telling yourself? So one time I was in a sales role, and anyone who's been in sales knows this feeling where you have really good meetings with someone, and you're like, oh, this person absolutely is going to purchase the product or our service or whatever it is. But then they go dark, they go quiet. You don't hear from them. You try following up with them again, and then you just have issues.
Either in sales or dating.
Exactly. So people can relate to that. But what's interesting is I had a fellow salesperson, Jake. Jake, if you're listening, shout out to you. Jake told me that he went through a training years ago. It wasn't Crucial Conversations, but it was something around what story are you telling yourself internally. And it's interesting because in this specific example, I was just saying, "Oh, I lost the deal. This person doesn't want to talk to me anymore." I just had this spiral of negativity, these really bad emotions, and it was affecting everything else in my day-to-day job. But what ended up happening is this person was just busy with doing another bid and a project at the time. And so they literally were not ignoring me. They just had their head down working through stuff. And so a few days later, they responded back. Or actually, they called me. They said, "Hey, Steven, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to ignore you. We're really excited about moving forward." And so I was like, "Oh my gosh, that everything that happened, all those bad emotions that I felt, literally was a story that I just made up in my head." So he mentioned the three stories: victim stories, villain, and helpless story. That was a helpless story where I was basically just coming up with this story in my head of why he's not going to buy from me, and I'm so disappointed, and my emotions are so down. But it was all made up. Like literally, the whole thing was made up. And then he called me, and I was like, "Oh, that was such a waste of like energy and time," but just from the story I was telling myself. So I thought of that when I re-listened to that clip from Joseph.
Yeah, I made that joke about this happening in dating, but my wife and I actually talk about this all the time. Do you remember as a kid when you like had a crush on somebody and you really only talk to them like once a day, back in middle school, but then you'd think about them so much and you'd create these narratives in your head that it felt like your relationship was always further along than it than it actually was. And then you'd see them for about 10 seconds and you'd be too scared to talk to them. But to me, that just shows how powerful this idea of telling yourself stories is, and creating these narratives in your head that convey real emotion. Every athlete has a sob story. But the thing about these sob stories is they're true. They're slighted. You have a coach who didn't like you didn't have an opportunity that someone else did that you deserved. But at the end of the day, the other thing that people say is nobody cares. And that's kind of a sad but also freeing thing to accept is that you can tell a sob story to yourself and to other people, and someone will give you sympathy for a second, but then you're still left with having to deal with it, right? No one really cares enough that it's going to change your situation. So you really have to stop telling yourself these types of stories that get you in that headspace. I remember my rookie year, I thought I had done enough, and statistically, I had to get an invite to the combine, where all the draft scouts go and all the teams go, and I had multiple other players that were invited over me, and I felt that it was unfair because statistically speaking, I should have gone, but I was a little bit older, didn't play at as big of a school, and I was really, I felt that it was very unfair, and I almost wanted other people to give me sympathy in that. And so I kept telling that story to myself and other people about how unfair it was. And then finally, I realized that it wasn't getting me anywhere. And my agent talked to me about how you're seeing this the wrong way. Who cares if it's unfair? Like, this is just part of your story, and no one really cared. So I think that I wasn't able to move past it until I saw it that way. And I just think it's really easy, what stories are you telling yourself right now that have created real emotion that might not be true, or even if they are true, it's not going to get you anywhere. So, anyways, really love that concept. Let's head to this last clip that we have from Joseph. It's not necessarily about his book, but it's about, his idea and the idea of success, which is a very common theme among these authors.
The way to be successful is to make sure that you're defining success in purposeful terms, not just in terms of an exit and building an organization or rising to a certain place in an organization. Those are the most unsatisfying pursuits of all. The most satisfying thing at this point in my career is having conversations like the one you and I are having right now. This is an absolutely perfect moment to me because it feels purposeful. It's on mission. It's about saying, are there a few people out there that are struggling in a relationship that before listening to your podcast have been filled with uncertainty, and they're going to walk out with greater confidence and align their actions with their basic values in a more effective way because of what we did. What a wonderful day. I will be a success today because of this conversation with you.
So once again, like I said, this is a very common theme that is talked about from all these authors, is this idea of, how do you measure success? And I think that on one hand, it's easy to say, oh, well, of course you can measure success like this as a successful author. But I think on the other hand, it's just this idea of peace and feeling purpose and peace in your life. And I think that is the success that everybody comes back to, and I think you're almost ready for that once you're sick of chasing success in other places, and you're ready for that purpose. For those who might have seen recently, Scotty Scheffler was asked at the Open Championship. He's the number one golfer in the world, best golfer in the world, has been for a year or two now. They asked him about just golf in general and how he feels about it, and if he drives for success more. And he just talked about how it doesn't fill that gap of, peace and purpose as much as other things do. And this is the number one golfer in the world, right? And I think he doesn't have those stressors that other people have, like money and bills, that I think really make it hard to define success like that. But if you can kind of isolate it and say, I want success, of course, but I also want purpose and peace. And that is what Joseph says is aligning your values with the way you live. So I love that.
Yeah, and I remember having that initial interview with Joseph Grenny, and he mentioned that. So I think I asked him what's your definition of success. That honestly has stuck with me since I talked with him about how he defined success was, hey, having this conversation with you, Stephen, I consider to be success. I consider that to be successful. And here it is, Joseph, as you can look him up, but he's been a very successful business person, has had all the accolades and done really well in his life. But I just thought it was interesting that that's how he was defining success. It also reminds me a little bit about, I'm sure many listeners have come across the whole hedonic treadmill concept, where you kind of have in your mind, okay, once I reach this, whether it's money, whether it's status, whether it's moving up in an organization, or you could also apply it to like material things like, okay, once I have this car or once I have this house or this item, then I will be happy. Then it's going to be great. And then you reach that, you get the new car or you get the promotion, you make the big sale, and you do have like a small hit of dopamine that can last for a few days, maybe even weeks. But then the whole concept of the hedonic treadmill is you kind of are back on the treadmill and you're saying, okay, well, what's the next thing that's going to give me that dopamine hit? And I think that's a little bit about what Scheffler was trying to articulate. And I think it's easy to talk about, especially for people who've quote unquote been successful. Yeah. But I think I think everyone can, there's truth to it, right? Where you can kind of contemplate and look at your own life and say, oh, I did say I was going to be totally happy once this happened, and now it's happened, and I've kind of gone back, and now I'm looking at something else. What is that purpose and that mission that you can find just in your day-to-day that you can be satisfied? It is about the journey and not the destination, which I know is, cliche to say that, but it's an interesting concept to think about. And it is a paradigm shift too.
No, I love it. Well, that wraps it up for us in terms of the clips. So, Stephen, what would you say is your paradigm shift that you take from this book, your favorite parts?
Yeah. And again, this episode we did is just a very brief overview of some of the key concepts, but I would just highly recommend everyone get a copy of Crucial Conversations, or even go online, go on YouTube, however you get your information, and look at some talks of Joseph Grenny kind of going through everything. But this book honestly could absolutely change a person's life. And I think for me, the key paradigm that I walked away with was that a crucial conversation is not something to avoid or to be afraid of, but rather you need to see it as an opportunity to grow, to build relationships, and then to solve problems. And I'm a little bit like Britt in the sense of I like to avoid conflict. And so the idea of intense conversations or high stakes conversations, I sometimes will avoid that. So that's been something I can admit. But I think if you could flip that and say, and have that paradigm shift to say, oh, actually, this is an opportunity to grow, to build relationships, and to actually solve problems, then that for me is kind of the shift. What about for you, Britt, as you read this and revisited it? What's kind of your key paradigm?
Well, I love what you said. I think for me, I never really considered it, but just the concept of lag time, he talks about in his book, he mentions even more statistics just about how truly impactful lag time is, and that you can really determine the health of an organization, a company, relationship by that idea of what's the lag time of when you see something that should or shouldn't be a certain way, and how long it takes for you to point it out, address it, talk about it, have those crucial conversations. So yeah, I love that. And once again, this was a very brief overview. There are a lot more specifics in the book, skills that he goes into, but we nailed some of the principles that he is definitely most proud of, that he feels are most impactful. And I really think they can benefit everybody. But if you are, you really looking for a book that will help you, like Stephen said, with some of these crucial conversations, go read it.
Absolutely. So anyways, we appreciate everyone listening as always, or tuning in. And hopefully you feel inspired to shorten that time between seeing something and saying something, starting with your heart and your intent when you go into conversations, and then also writing better stories about the people around you and the events going on in your life. So those type of small shifts can truly kind of change everything.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it.